The coronavirus has got many people panicked. It started in China, in Wuhan, which has now been cut off. I mean, think of it, a city of 11 million people quarantined. It's incredible. But the virus is still spread around Asia to the US and Australia. 5 confirmed cases here. In China, the death toll has reached 80 people. Now, that sounds scary, but remember, more than 3,000 Australians die each year from the flu, usually older people or frail, as the people dying from coronavirus predominantly. So this may not be such a big deal, but here is the thing. The Spanish flu 100 years ago killed 50 million people plus. When the next deadly pandemic comes, it will probably come just like this coronavirus, flown around the world from anywhere in an instant. And in China, there's another consideration. This scare could mean trouble for dictator Xi Jinping. To discuss this, I'm joined by Jonathan Cheng, China Bureau Chief for the Wall Street Journal. Jonathan, thank you so much for your time. This virus, this mutation, it's believed to have come across from animals and to have started in Wuhan's Wuhan market. Now, I've seen remarkable pictures. You've got one on your blog, on your Twitter feed, etc. People selling everything from rats and crocodiles and hedgehogs and snakes to even a live ostrich and wolves. Surely it's now clear to authorities a market like that is now a menace not just to locals, but the world.
Yeah, and what makes it worse is that SARS, severe acute respiratory syndrome, which happened in 2002-2003, related to this virus, that also began in a very similar sort of market down in southern China. After that incident, the authorities pledged basically to crack down or at least make sure that this wasn't going to be causing a problem to the human race. But now here we are almost 2 decades later, and we have a very similar problem on our hands.
That is so interesting. What do you think is going to happen then?
Well, it's hard to know. Obviously, we can't ask the virus. We don't know if the virus is going to mutate. We don't know exactly where it is right now because, we're still trying to figure out even very basic attributes of the virus. How long does it take to show symptoms? How easily is it transmitted from one person to another? These are things that are going to take some time. There's already some speculation about all of these different attributes, but I don't think that the science is settled here. And even if it were, it could mutate. So this is really something that we're really going to be struggling to get our hands on.
Jonathan, how have China's authorities handled this? I mean, cutting off a city of 11 million people is extraordinary. It's something I wonder whether our democracies would have the guts to do. How are they handling it, do you think?
Well, I mean, I think the general view is that at first they probably moved too slowly, and now the question is whether they're moving too quickly or too dramatically. And you're right, this is the sort of thing that you can do in a system like China. Some authorities, some health experts, they argue this is the right thing to do, that when you cut down on travel, and this is the Lunar New Year holiday in China, this is the busiest travel time of the year. When you have that many people traveling, if you didn't restrain them at all, then this virus really could spread quite quickly. And so I think the thinking there is that the individual freedoms of several million people for a few weeks is better than having the whole, world threatened by this disease. On the other hand, it's just not clear whether or not this is going to do the trick. Many tens of millions of people have already left Wuhan and Hubei province, and they're already in many parts of the country, and many of them are overseas, including the ones that have been identified in Australia and in many other countries now.
How's the public taking all this and responding to what the authorities are doing?
Well, I do think that there was a lot of anger directed at the local authorities because at first it was really just a question of the Wuhan municipal authorities and the Hubei province provincial authorities. They were doing it. And the central leadership, Xi Jinping and others in Beijing, were largely absent. They weren't showing up to the scene of the outbreak. They weren't talking about it. They were doing other things. And now you really see a shift over the weekend. You had Xi Jinping convene a special meeting of the Communist Party senior leadership. You had him send his number 2 to Wuhan today for the first time. So this is now saying we're in charge here. The local authorities aren't doing the job. You had some of the local authorities now threatening to resign and apologizing and saying that they underestimated the scope of this. So that's a good reaction, I suppose. You have the central authorities now stepping in here. They have more power than the regional authorities. The question is, if they can't stop it, then the responsibility presumably is going to fall on their shoulders.
It's so interesting what you described, though, Jonathan, isn't it? Because essentially China, authoritarian system, well, President Xi Jinping, let's call him a dictator, And yet what you're saying is he's not such a dictator that he can ignore the local anger. And I'm just wondering, you know, particularly in a society like China, no one trusts the authorities to tell the truth anyway, because there's no real free speech. Conspiracy theories spread. Is there much political risk now here for President Xi?
I do think that there's great risk, and I think they acknowledge that, and that's why they're showing such a forceful display here of power and trying to say, we can shut down these cities, we will do whatever it takes at this point. The question is whether it's too little, too late, and that's really something that is a political question, but it's also a scientific question. And obviously, Xi Jinping is not a scientist, he's not a specialist in infectious diseases, so he's going to have his approach, but whether or not the virus listens and and obeys, that's something that we're all going to see whether this works or not.
Jonathan Cheng, this is fascinating. No doubt we'll hear a lot more from this, and for the people that are interested in this, because I think this will have political implications, to follow your writing in the Wall Street Journal. Jonathan Cheng, thank you so much indeed for your time.
Thank you for having me.